Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a best-selling novel and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe.
And I'm Mark Stay, and as always, a huge thank you to everyone who keeps this show going, including our patrons on Patreon and our academates in the Bestseller Academy. If you want to discover more about the Academy, go to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com, or if you want to support the podcast, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. Mr. D, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Mark, and I think we have to announce this week is actually National Support a Podcast Week, as every week is. So absolutely, folks. Come and join in the fun. There's so much more that you can get from being a supporter of this podcast. But yeah, there's so much to talk about today, Mark, isn't there? I'm doing great. I want to find out though how your Comic-Con experiences went. You went on a massive adventure this last weekend.
Yeah, I mean, we're recording this way ahead of time, so you'll be listening to this probably in the middle of November. But yeah, I was at the MCM Comic-Con at the end of October, which is the big one in the UK, the London Comic-Con. I think on the Saturday, which is when we were there, there's footfall of 100,000 people over the weekend.
I can't believe there's that many people.
And it's at the Excel Centre in London, which is, I think, a mile long from end to end. And there's two colossal halls just full of wonderful geeky stuff. And yeah, I was there. I was moderating a panel on world building with some wonderful authors. We had a really, really good time. You have to be, it was a panel of 6 authors, but only 3 microphones. And they didn't have enough chairs. So one of the, Paul Clare North was sitting on the floor. But we had a full house, standing room only kind of thing. You're in a corner of this vast hall and it's all kind of bordered off, but there's still lots of external noise coming in. So you have to be a bit of a circus barker, you have to, and and people have got questions. So there's no one doing the mic. So I'm running out into the audience, handing out microphones and stuff like that. So it was quite energetic. It was really, really good fun. I'm glad I did it, but I'm also glad that we had access to the green room, which is
backstage.
Exactly. A little bit of oasis of calm with a balcony, and there's sandwiches and fruit and drinks and stuff like that. It's all very, very civilized. So I'm so glad we had that as well. Yeah.
With your very own access to your personal porter cabin, right? Potty.
Well, they did have very nice lavatories, not a porter cabin. It was a
people don't realise that. It's one of the best perks of being backstage, isn't it? Right?
It really is.
That's fantastic.
Really is.
Tell me one thing that was surprising about this year's Comic-Con. Was there something that made you laugh, or apart from obviously the incredible amounts of people showing up as well, which is insane?
It was the good vibe, actually. Everyone was in you get that number of people together. Like if you put 100,000, I don't know, football fans together, there's always an element that's a bit, but it was just a big love-in at the MCM. I think people were just delighted and happy to be there. And even though it was quite crowded, everyone was in a really good mood. I think that always gives you sort of hope for the future of humanity. So yeah, there was a feeling of optimism there. I did we all did a signing at on the Forbidden Planet stand afterwards. And everyone I spoke to on the stand was just delighted to see authors and get their books signed. And it was a really, really good, positive vibe, which I tell you what, this was really encouraging. And when I've been doing the MCM Comic-Con for quite a few years now. I don't think I've ever seen such a diverse Comic-Con. It used to be very white. And this was probably the most diverse Comic-Con I've ever seen. And of course, the thing that's happened is we've had, Black Panther and Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse and stuff like that, where you've got, non-white people leading these great franchises and movies and animated films and what have you. So it felt really inclusive. It felt really, like I say, really positive, really, really, particularly there's a lot of news at the moment, Mr. D. I'm sure if you spend more than 20 minutes watching rolling news, it's like, oh my God. So, it was nice to just be in with a bunch of people who were, being geeky about the things that they love. That was the thing that gave me hope.
That's brilliant. Oh, I'm glad to hear it, because I do think there's something wonderful when you get a group of people together who are all excited to be somewhere. And like you say, it's a little bit of a break from reality. I always used to think about conferences and festivals in particular, like, we talked about that last week about leaving planet Earth for a few days or just even a day. And so, I think it's super important. And you're absolutely right. I think at times that we're going through right now, where there's a lot of difficult news and a lot of people are really struggling, I think that it's even more important to find your tribe of people that build you up, that have good energy around you. Because I think there's right now, such a challenge, isn't there? Like, so many people are so down about everything that it brings everyone else down. And I think it's great. I think it recharges the battery, doesn't it, in many ways? Definitely. Now let's dive into our interview this week, because we have talking about a positive force and a positive energy. We have a lovely guest this week, don't we? Tell us about Tracey Lien.
Tracey Lien, she was born and raised in southwestern Sydney, Australia, but she's been a reporter for the Los Angeles Times. She lives in Brooklyn, New York, and she's got a debut novel, All That's Left Unsaid, which tells the story of a young Vietnamese Australian woman who returns home in the wake of her brother's shocking murder. And we discuss all kinds. This is such a fun interview. All sorts of great stuff. We talk about how she developed a writing habit, and long-time listeners, this will be familiar to you. She talks about balancing an entertaining story with real-world issues, and very importantly, why readers don't owe you anything.
Brilliant. So let's dive in and listen to the enlightenment of Tracey Lien.
Tracey Lien, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you. All the better for discovering your novel, All That's Left Unsaid, which is just remarkable stuff. It's beautifully written. And I think a lot of it is to do with the protagonist, who you really get into straight away. But let's hear it from you. Tell us about All That's Left Unsaid and where it's come from.
Okay, so All That's Left Unsaid is a novel that's set in the year 1996 in Cabramatta, which is a Vietnamese refugee enclave in Sydney, Australia. And the story begins when a 17-year-old boy is beaten to death at a busy Cabramatta restaurant. When his older sister, Key, returns home for the funeral, she learns that the police are completely stumped by her brother's case. About a dozen witnesses were present, and they all claim to have seen nothing. So she takes it upon herself to track down each witness to find out what happened. And with each chapter, you learn a bit more and get closer and closer to the truth. So there are elements of like a murder mystery there, but it also deals with, refugee communities and the myth of the model minority and, how it feels when you're sort of straddling two worlds.
Yeah, Key is fascinating to me because you've written it in a very close third person. We're kind of right over Key's shoulder, and it has this friendly, almost confessional feel. And she's our way into this family and friends in this community. Can you tell us about the choice to tell the story from Key's point of view?
Yeah, one of the pieces of advice that I was given when I was studying creative writing in grad school was have an active protagonist. My advisor at the time, she was not prescriptive about a lot of things. She was like, write whatever you want, set it wherever you want, in whatever genre, but please just have an active protagonist. And when she said that, a light bulb went off because I had been writing short stories in class that were sort of like, oh, this person has a lot of feelings and they're reflecting but what are they actually doing? Are they actually kind of depressed and not doing a lot? And we're just in their head a lot. And so the moment she said, have an active protagonist, I was like, oh, I need someone who is actually doing things in this world, who is actually interacting with people. And so I figured, okay, let's follow the sister of the murder victim. And let's make her a journalist as well, because I knew that Key would be probably quite a reserved and anxious person. So I was like, how do I give her the tools to do something that would mortify most people, which is to track down the witnesses to your brother's murder? And having worked in journalism myself, and as a fairly reserved and quiet person normally, whenever I put on my journalist hat, I felt a lot more powerful, a lot more capable. And honestly, most of the time I was just afraid of letting down my editors. And so I would just do whatever it took. And so I was like, I'll make her a journalist. And this way she's got that external element to give her the strength, to go and track down these witnesses.
That is such a great piece of advice, because it is a classic mistake made by a lot of first-time writers, but I still do it. I suspect a lot of writers listening to this to still do it. You have a protagonist, you want them to sort of represent an ideal, and as you said, you're thinking about thoughts and feelings, but things are happening to them and they're not necessarily driving the story. And it is like a light bulb going off in your head, isn't it, when you think, oh, actually, they can be an agent of change in this world, which is
absolutely.
Yeah.
And they don't have to be like the superhero, right? They don't have to be, when we think of people talking about like a strong character, we're not talking about someone who is invincible and fearless. Key Tran is filled with uncertainty and doubt, and she is at times neurotic and petty and unlikable. But the fact that she is willing to be an active participant in the world, that things happen in the world because of her, that is what makes her an active protagonist. So for anyone who's listening thinking like, but I don't want my character to be a superhero, they don't have to be. The world just has to change in some way because of them. And that was the advice I have taken to heart and continue to think about a lot.
The other word you used there, which rang a bell with me, is unlikable. And very often you might get a note back saying, this character's unlikable. And it's often quite a misguided note, because it doesn't mean being unlikable is a bad thing. I think some of our favorite characters in fiction are unlikable. I think what it generally means is they're kind of a bit boring and not doing anything. And, to have a character with agency, to have a character, like you say, an active protagonist, sometimes they have to ruffle a few feathers and upset people. And that's what Key does throughout the story. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's about having a character that people can become invested in. And part of that is understanding why they are the way they are. So if you have a character who's just a bit of a jerk, consistently like a jerk, and you don't really understand why, and nothing seems to, nothing interesting really happens as a result of their jerkery, then I think that's when people sort of lose patience, but they're like, wait, why am I giving my time to this jerk? So that I think there has to be some kind of reward, whether they are a very entertaining jerk or a very witty jerk, or there is a backstory that makes you understand why they are the way they are. And so you have a bit more sympathy for them.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned, this is set in 1996. You said it's dealing with some pretty heavy issues as well, discrimination against Asian Australians. But you've also said that it's important that it's a page turner. Can you talk about how you balance those two elements, where you're dealing with some, real history, real lives, real communities, but also putting a murder mystery in the middle of that as well? How do you keep that balance even?
It was really important to me that this novel didn't feel like homework to read. Right. Yeah, sometimes you know that there's a book that you should read, but either the way it's been marketed or the way you've heard it talked about, you're just like, I'll get around to it. I'll buy it. I'll put it on my bookshelf, and one of these days I will get around. And I didn't want my book to fall into that category, even though a lot of those books, once you read them, you're like, oh, why did I wait? This is amazing. And so knowing that I was going to write about issues of race and discrimination and, the struggles of this refugee community, I was like, these are very heavy themes to begin with. So how do I make it tempting? How do I lure people at that and going like, oh, race or racism? And so I thought about the books that I love and the books that I can't put down once I start them. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them ended up being murder mysteries or thrillers. I think of Viet Thanh Nguyen's The Sympathizer, which is this incredibly intellectual book about Vietnam and American imperialism, but it's a spy thriller as well. And there's a great quote from him where he said, a lot of novels that are historically or politically concerned tend to be long on mood and short on entertainment. Right. And I wanted to write a novel that could do both. And again, that was another light bulb moment where I'm like, oh, I can write about, my feelings and all the moody aspect of things and have it not be a slog. If I sort of play my cards right, if I'm very deliberate in how I structure this and in the type of story I want to tell. Because ultimately, I knew I wanted to tell a story that challenged the myth of the model minority and would explore these themes. But I could do that in any number of ways. I could have written an epic poem. I could have done a short story collection. I could have, done it in a series of limericks. And so it's like knowing that I have all these options, why not choose the one that would actually engage readers and would hopefully get my ideas across? And so for me, personally, I love murder mysteries. I love crime thrillers. And so I chose to learn from those.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned earlier your background in journalism, and we love talking to journalists who've become novelists because they tell us the same thing every time, which is their background in journalism has really helped them as a novelist because they're used to deadlines, they're used to rewriting, they're used to honing it down. Can you tell us, how your journalism has helped you as a writer?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when I first quit my job in journalism to go and study creative writing at the University of Kansas, I was worried that my journalism background would hold me back. Because in journalism, you're not allowed to make things up. And in fiction writing, that's the name of the game. And so I would sort of be looking over my shoulder as I was writing fiction, like scared that the fact police were going to come get me. I was like, oh my goodness, like, what am I doing? This isn't allowed. But then once I got over that, I realized that a lot of the skills from journalism transferred wonderfully. So, for example, the discipline of writing every day. As a journalist, if you only wrote when you were inspired, you'd get fired like pretty quickly. And so, when I set out to write this novel, I was like, okay, what's the shortest novel? It's like 60,000 words-ish, which is around 200 pages. The longest thing I'd ever written as a journalist was maybe 3,000 words long. So I was like, how do I, that's a really intimidating word count to hit. So I was like, just write every day, a little bit every day. And I set the bar really low for myself. I set 300 words, which,
Brilliant.
You text more than 300 words a day. And in the early days, I was really strict about it, where I would actually stop at 300 words, even if I was midway through a sentence, because I was like, I'm going to have more gas in the tank for tomorrow.
Right.
I want to leave gas in the tank, and I don't care if I feel like I'm on a roll. Even if I feel like I could write 3,000 words today, I'm not going to do it because I'll probably feel depleted tomorrow. So it was about building a habit, and I wanted to spend more days writing than days spent not writing.
Now, listeners are going to think we've set Tracey up or we've prompted her to do this because, Tracey, I don't know if you're aware, on the podcast, we have a thing called the 200 word a day challenge. And it's like you've just repeated back to me the things that we've been saying for about 3 years on this podcast about creating a habit, having a, setting yourself. We have 200 words a day, 300 words a day is absolutely, perfect. So, yeah, and it really works, doesn't it? It really, really does work.
Right, because once it becomes a habit, it's no longer daunting. And when something doesn't scare you anymore, you develop confidence. And once you have confidence, you have momentum. And once you have momentum, before you know it, you've hit a first draft. And whether or not the draft is any good is beside the point. It's like you have done it, and now you can go back and revise and turn it into the thing that you ultimately want it to be. So discipline was one of them. The other was, I learned the hard way as a reporter that your readers don't owe you anything, and they will abandon your story the moment they lose interest. And so when I was a reporter, the thing I disliked the most was at the end of each day, we'd get the charts that would show us the reader numbers, like which article got the most views.
Oh, really?
And I would spend weeks working on a big feature and think, this is so important. I've put so much into this, only to see it at the bottom of the charts because no one read it or no one got past the first few paragraphs. And it'd be like a dagger to the heart. But what I realized was just because I think a story is interesting doesn't mean everyone else will. And it's my job to make it interesting. So that could take the form of, a lead that just grabs the reader, like a hook that, really grabs someone. It could be a rendering of a character that's so colorful that people can't look away. Like sometimes, when you start an article and you're like, this person sounds like a trip, like I need to keep reading. Sometimes it's just the presentation of information that's so important that people don't want to abandon the story. And so taking that approach to drafting all that's left unsaid, like I would go back and reread things and be really critical about it. Like first draft, I would allow myself to make a mess. I was not hard on myself at all. I was just bang out the 300 words a day until you get to a first draft. But when I went back to revise, that's when I really scrutinized everything and asked myself, okay, if I'm losing interest here, like if I sort of just speed read that, that's a bad sign.
Right.
Like, does this need to be here? Or if I would end a chapter and feel, okay, I can close the book now, that was a bad sign as well. And I would just ask myself, how do I leave the reader wanting to turn the page more? And again, this came back to, like, I didn't have to figure this out just in my own brain. I could look to examples. I could pick up, Jane Harper's The Dry and just look at how she did it. I could pick up Trent Dalton's Boy Swallows Universe and see how he did it. There are already so many examples that we can learn from. And, it was such a valuable source of inspiration. So sort of merging the journalism, I guess, the revision process of a journalist with doing research and reading what's already out there.
That is absolutely, I had no idea that journalism had that facility and that it was that forensic. You could learn at which paragraph people were dropping out. And I think it's something that novelists, we kind of, I guess the closest we get to that is when we ask beta readers or editors to look at our books and they will give us feedback on that. But of course, once the book is out in the big bad world, there's nothing we can really do. So that's a great discipline to develop as well. That's absolutely terrific. Now, I want to talk about the fact that very often I'll speak to people on the authors on the podcast, and I'll say, "Oh, you were always a writer from a young age." And they go, "Yes, as soon as I could write, I was writing stories." But that wasn't the case with you, was it, Tracey?
Not at all. And sometimes I'm a bit embarrassed to admit that I wasn't much of a reader growing up. And I would feel like these days I feel envy when I read profiles of other authors and they're like, yes, I used to get lost in books, as a child, or I was born with a pen in my hand, or I was obsessed with writing stories from the time I was 4. And I was like, oh, I was watching a lot of reality TV and talk shows and there are whole plot points or storylines from the Oprah Winfrey Show or The Bold and the Beautiful that I have it's just in there in my head and I can't get rid of it. So I think there are 2 reasons why I wasn't really much of a reader as a kid. First is my parents were refugees from Vietnam and they're fluent in Chinese and Vietnamese, but not in English. And so we didn't have English language books at home. And your bedtime reading wasn't really a thing. So I didn't develop that habit early on. But I also know a lot of children of refugees who are avid readers. So what's my excuse then? And I think it was that I got my storytelling fix from television. It was easy. It was accessible. And there was no one at home judging me. There was no one telling me, you really should pick up a book instead of watching TV. It was, the TV was a very effective babysitter for after school hours. And so, if you were to watch The Bold and the Beautiful, it's dramatic, it's scandalous. It really scratches that storytelling itch. And then if you were to watch Judge Judy, Neighbors, again, maybe it's not the most nutritional kind of storytelling, but it did the job for me at that time. And so, I just didn't read a lot. And then the books that we were tasked with reading at school, there was a lot of Jane Austen. Right. And while I now have an appreciation for Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice, I remember when it was assigned in, I think maybe year 10, I was just baffled. like that first line, it's a truth universally acknowledged, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what? Like, I'm this 16-year-old from Southwest Sydney. Like, what is this? And so I felt really dumb a lot of the time. And it was a very frustrating experience to be reading these books that I found unrelatable. Oftentimes I didn't really understand what was going on. And so I decided, like, maybe books aren't for me. Like, which sounds ridiculous in hindsight, but at the time I really felt like, oh, maybe this just isn't my medium. Maybe I'm just a TV kind of person or a magazine type of person. And it wasn't until my early 20s that I gave books another shot. And then I was like, oh my God, I've been a fool. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, the thing is, you talk about daytime soaps, and I mean, we've had John York on the show, who wrote for a soap in the UK called EastEnders, and they have to write 5-6 episodes a week, and they've got to write compelling, dramatic storytelling. So yes, it might not be Jane Austen, but it grips people and people keep coming back for more. So all those elements of storytelling are there, and you're absorbing them, either consciously or subconsciously. So, all the ingredients are there. It's all an education one way or another. I'm interested to know, when you said you discovered books, was there one book or one author that got you excited about reading?
Yes, it was George Saunders' Civil War Land in Bad Decline, which is a short story collection. And when I read it, I thought, this is hilarious. I didn't know that books could be this funny and this playful, because again, like when your idea of what books can be is Jane Austen, suddenly to read George Saunders, it was a breath of fresh air. And again, I felt very foolish in the moment that, like, I had not made a greater effort to find books that might connect with me. But again, it comes back to just the way that my storytelling itch was scratched by so many other forms of entertainment. So I could be lazy about it. And it was only when I read, George Saunders, and I was like, I need to read more by him. And then I read everything he wrote. And then I started looking for authors similar to him. And then I started to branch out beyond that and asking friends for recommendations. I remember, like, that year when I discovered books, I just went to everyone I knew and said, what's your top 5?
Right.
Not the books that you think people should read, but what are your 5 favorites?
Right.
And so if it's something that's a little soapy, if it's something that's super commercial, like, just there's no judgment here. I just want your top 5. And then that's how things, like, expanded out from there. And I started to understand my own taste and what I liked and what I didn't like. And yeah, the rest is history.
Was there a moment when you're reading, and you're a journalist, but you start writing novels? Was there a moment where you thought, I want to do this? And was there someone, because very often we speak to authors, sometimes as a mentor or a teacher or a tutor, who sort of taps someone on the shoulder and says, look, you can do this, keep doing it. Was there that moment?
So the reason I got into journalism, so I knew I wanted to be a journalist from the time I was 13. And it was because I was obsessed with a magazine called Dolly, which is sort of like a teen Vogue, just a magazine for teenage girls. And what I loved about it was that when I read something in there, it would change the way I viewed the world in some way. It could be like just a human interest profile about another 16-year-old or another 14-year-old. But I was like, oh, I can't unlearn that now. This has expanded my world in some way. And then I realized, oh, this is a job. Someone does this for a living. And so that's why I got into journalism and ended up at the LA Times, which was a wonderful place to work. The training there was incredible, and I had a lot of fun there. But then when Donald Trump became president, the job changed a bit, where every day there was a new crisis. And the stories I was working on, I no longer felt that, oh, perhaps this could be the thing that changes how someone sees the world. Because every day it was just a new crisis. I felt like I was treading water.
Right.
And that's when I was like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And around that time, I had been taking a creative writing class with a view of improving my journalism.
Right.
And an editor of mine at the LA Times, who is absolutely wonderful and always like cared about what we as reporters wanted for our careers. He was like, have you thought of leaving journalism to get an MFA? And I said, what's an MFA? And he said, well, it's a Master of Fine Arts. And, if you have one, you can teach. But also MFAs, like you could use it to study creative writing, you could use it to study fiction, and you seem to be enjoying this creative writing class you're taking on the side. It could buy you some time to figure out what you want to do next. And so that was, it all happened pretty fast. Like I think he told me about the MFA in September, and then I was applying in November. Right. And then I found out I'd gotten in the following February. So it was very fast. But yeah, I'd say it was the combination of those events that sort of led me down this path.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Now, as I'm also fascinated because you're working in the journalism world, but you don't have any contacts in the publishing world, and this is going to be very familiar to a lot of our listeners. And you've told us before the recording how you got your agent. And again, listeners, we have not prompted Tracey to tell us this. This is something, again, we've been telling, it's a little nugget of advice we've been telling people for years. How did you get a list of agents? Tell us how you did that.
So I looked for novels that I either really loved or were in a similar genre to what I was writing. Then I flipped it to the back and went to the acknowledgements section, because if an agent is even competent, they will be thanked in the acknowledgement section. So I would find the name and then I'd Google them. Sometimes they have a website. Sometimes they have a listing on like a publisher's marketplace kind of exchange. And then I would look to see, are they saying that they're looking for something in particular? And then I would craft a query letter, which is, I'm not sure if it's the same in the United Kingdom, but in America, which is where I did my querying, it's a letter that's about 3 to 4 paragraphs long, where opening paragraph, you just try to hook them with what your novel's about. Second paragraph, you expand on it. Third paragraph, you perhaps compare it to other novels that are already out there, which is a very daunting thing to do because, I had this unpublished manuscript, and here I was saying, like, well, if you like Celeste Ng and Viet Thanh Nguyen, like Pulitzer winner Viet Thanh Nguyen, you might like. I was like, man, I am embarrassing myself. And then you want a line in there that explains to the agent why you're querying them in particular, so that it's not just some generic email blast you're sending out. And here's where my journalism skills came in handy again, which is that as a journalist, anytime I wanted to do a story, I had to be able to pitch it to my editor. Like I couldn't just go off and write it. I had to pitch it to them. And oftentimes they'd be like, okay, make it quick. And then if they liked it, they had to be able to pitch it to the section editor. Right. So it had to be snappy enough that they could remember it and then pitch it. And that section editor, if they wanted the story for the front page, they had to be ready to then pitch it to another team. And so anytime I had an idea for a story, I needed to be able to synthesize it, give an elevator pitch, which I think can be very hard to do, especially if you've written a novel, you've written 60,000 words, 80,000 words. Give me a 15-second elevator pitch on your novel. And it's like, oh, panic mode. And I remember when I first started trying to tell friends about my novel, I would say, well, it's set in this neighborhood in Australia, which used to have like this heroin epidemic, but there were also a lot of refugees there. And in 1996, there's this woman and her brother, and I could just see my friend's eyes like glaze over. And I was like, okay, I really need to work on this. And so I worked on it, and I would write out a summary, and then I would like, okay, let's try to get that short, get it snappier. Let's scrutinize every word until I got it down to, when a 17-year-old boy is beaten to death at a restaurant, his older sister comes home, yada. And so that then made it into my query letter. And my agent, once I spoke to her, and I asked her, like, what was it that, that drew your interest? And she said, well, it was what you wrote in your query letter. Like, I had to request your manuscript after seeing how you pitched it.
Wow.
So yeah, I think that the journalism skill of pitching definitely came in handy there.
Absolutely brilliant. That's gold. Thank you for sharing that, Tracey. Appreciate it. Now, having been through the publishing process, what are the biggest lessons that you've learned? And is there anything you would do differently next time around?
I wouldn't do anything differently because this has all led me to having my novel published. So I think that is probably the right answer for me. In terms of what I've learned, it's a similar thing to what I learned in journalism. So I think it just sort of reinforced this idea of being open to revision, because revision is where the writing really happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have so many writing analogies, all of which are probably confusing and not great. But the way I think of the first draft is you're digging for clay. You know, you're a ceramicist. You're simply digging up the substance that is known as clay. And your first draft is that pile of clay that is not shaped into anything yet, but it's the substance of what your story will be. And then revision is where you start shaping it and taking the clay and molding it into a vase or a sculpture. And with each round of revision, you're refining it more and more. And sometimes you're perhaps destroying it only to do it again.
Yeah.
And I did that a lot as I was writing. And then once I had sold the manuscript and I was going through revisions with my editor at HarperCollins, it felt like more of that. You know, it felt like someone coming in and saying, you know, you've done a good job of creating this vase, but I could see it's going to chip over there. I could see there's an air bubble there. It'll explode in the kiln if you put it in now. You know, like these are let's go back and like undo a couple of things and add a couple of things. So yeah, it's a very revision is super important.
Fantastic. Now, looking on your Instagram, I saw that you've been using a series of adorable dogs to promote your book. First of all, folks, we'll put a link to Tracey's Instagram in the show notes so you can check this out. What brought that about? I mean, and did it work, do you think?
I mean, dogs are the best people. And so I dog sit a lot for my friends. So I personally don't have dogs, but all my friends do. So I'm the go-to dog sitter a lot of the time. And, you know, what I get in exchange for that is I use my friends' dogs for content purposes. I'm like, okay, you want to stay here, you better earn your place. Please sit here with a copy of my novel and now smile and be adorable. Whether or not it works, I have no idea, but it delights me.
Good.
And I think that's worth it.
Fantastic. And what's coming next from you, Tracey? What are you working on now?
So I'm working on a second novel, but I am in that clay digging stage where I don't really know what this will look like, but I am trusting in the process. It worked for the first one, so I'm hoping it'll work for a second one.
I'm sure it will. Absolutely fantastic. Folks, all that's left unsaid is out there now. Grab your copy. It's getting the most amazing reviews. Tracey Lien, thank you so much for speaking to us and hope to speak to you again very soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That was such a wonderful interview, Mark. And I think for me, it was really good to be reminded of the simplicity of, and I say simplicity in quotes, but this idea of, if you want to find that dream editor, if you want to find that dream agent, There's clues in every single best-selling book out there in the acknowledgement section, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've known a more difficult time to find an agent, or an editor if you're looking for freelance editors or what have you, because I think they're all still reeling from lockdown. I did a recording in a publisher's office a few weeks ago, and this was in the middle of the day, and it was half empty because a lot of people are only working 2 or 3 days a week still, so there are people working from home. And when if you're an agent, you rely on things like the mailroom and having someone to photocopy something for you and stuff like that. So I think they're struggling at the moment. I think the vibe I'm getting is getting through that slush pile. They still haven't caught up from lockdown, So I think finding an agent is tough. So anything that gives you a little bit of an edge, and we've always said this, look in the acknowledgements, because as Tracey said, that means they've got something made. And if they're in the acknowledgements, it means they're actually a nice person as well. They've been a positive
absolutely.
Force.
It's a good reminder as well to everyone out there that it's also about finding that perfect partner in some ways, or near perfect partner, like a match. Because if you start looking at acknowledgement sections of books that are completely irrelevant to what you're doing, there's a reason why these agents and the reason why these editors work with those particular authors is because they're also into or fascinated or love their work. So when you target people that are close to, in your kind of tribe, if you like, of authors that you would live in, if you could kind of pick your perfect support group, being able to go to those particular people means there's a much higher chance they're gonna resonate with your work. And I think just that way of filtering down, rather than like, I'm going to open the Writer's Yearbook and go talk to every single person.
I mean, that's the thing. You open the Writers and Artists Yearbook and there are thousands of them. So where do you even start?
Where do you start?
Yeah, go to the bookshop. The other thing, when you go to the bookshop, you're looking for books that are similar to yours. And once you start thinking, what books are similar to mine, then you have those comparisons. You start thinking, okay, I can compare myself to this author or that author. And then you can start thinking of that submission letter that Tracey was talking about, and the way that you pitch yourself to those agents and editors and stuff like that. So you will learn so much by just looking for books that are similar to yours in the context of a bookshop. Where are they shelved? What are the books next to them? What are the books that are like them? What sort of language are they using when they're pitching? All of that good stuff. Yeah.
And it's a good reminder to everyone out there when they pick up that book of one of their favourite authors to remember simply this: they were once where you were. They were doing exactly the same thing, possibly in even the same bookshop, looking in other people's books, and that's how maybe they got that same editor. So there's a generational cycle of life happening here, and I think it's very, very good to be reminded of that. Now, I love the fact that Tracey is really up in the game here with a 300-word-a-day challenge.
And honestly, listeners, we did not put Tracey up to this. This is totally her thing. It's just a weird coincidence. She does 100 more words a day than we do. So, but yeah, and I love this thing that she said, and she lays it out so clearly. Once you develop a habit, it's no longer daunting. When something doesn't scare you, you develop confidence. Once you have confidence, you have momentum, and then you've got a first draft. It's easier said than done, but that is a very, very clear path. And we're hearing this again and again and again from people doing the 200-word-a-day challenge. Absolutely. It's terrific.
Now, one of the things I wanted to chat about was the fact that Tracey, it was fascinating that she said she was very, very strict on, she would do her 300 words. And even if she was midway through a sentence, and even if she had that momentum, wanted to keep writing, she would stop. And what we've noticed in the 200-word challenge, I think we've said this a number of times on the podcast, that actually one of the really massive benefits of the 200-word challenge is most people might not sit down to write on a particular day. But if they only have 200 words to write, they think, okay, I'll do it because it's 15 minutes of my day, it's 20 minutes of my day. But what we've discovered with the 200-word challenge is that on average, people write a day, people that do it consistently, they're writing 650 words a day. Yeah. So but I also love this idea. I think, it's horses for courses, like whatever thing works for you. The fact that Tracey would say, I would stop at 300 a day was another way that you can do it. You can say, no, I'll save those new words that I've got for tomorrow. I mean, I personally like the idea of writing till you're exhausted, because you might end up writing 2,000 words. I'm sure people have.
Yes, but what I think Tracey understood in that early stage, I'm sure she doesn't stop at 300 words every day now, but what she understood, it was about creating a habit.
Yes, it wasn't about so much how much she wrote. It's about the minimum she wrote every day. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what she understands. And this episode will be going out in the middle of NaNoWriMo, where people are probably, if they're doing it, might be at their lowest ebb.
They're hitting the brick wall, aren't they?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And, folks, don't worry about it. Just 200 words a day, within a year. Yeah, exactly.
You still write more words in a year doing 200 words a day than you do, as much as I love NaNoWriMo, and they're brilliant friends of the podcast, but if you just do NaNoWriMo once a year, you will not write as many words if you write 200 words every single day. And I'll tell you which one's better for your mental health and your relationships at home, because we've heard of all kinds of bad things. Literally, people talk when they do NaNoWriMo, it's like going on a boot camp for a month. And they have to warn their family. It's like, you will not be seeing me for the next month. And then they have December, where they have to catch up on all the stuff they didn't get done in November because they were writing.
Well, what's the word Tracey used? Daunting. NaNoWriMo, I've never done it because I'm not sure I could. And I haven't missed a day's writing this year. I've written over 300,000 words so far this year to date. That's and that doesn't seem daunting to me at all. But the idea of taking a month out and doing that many words every day, and I've been doing this for yonks, I've got 6 books out and more on the way and a couple of films. And I think, oh, God, that's hard. That's really, really hard. So, it is daunting. So 200 words, 300 words feels a lot more doable.
Yeah, I think also NaNoWriMo is brilliant if you've not been writing. And you've got all this pent up, like, I've not been writing for a year or 2 years. Or 5. It can be a real, it's like an electric shock to the system. It's like, right, you're going to completely go full in. And then off the back of that, I think it possibly is, if you don't get burnt out, obviously, it can be easier to get back into the writing habit. But I do fear for people that use any kind of crash course thing. It's a bit like crash dieting. And we know that crash dieting, typically, like if you just say, right, I'm going to not have anything to eat for the next month. That's not healthy. You might lose weight, but it's not sustainable. So it's this idea of just looking at nature. Like nature, a tomato plant doesn't grow a tomato in 2 days. It might in some weird lab somewhere in the desert, but nature, it's slow and steady wins the race. It's little and often, as we always talk about on the podcast.
But then, just to contradict myself, one of the people I was sitting on the panel, and I was sitting next to at Forbidden Planet, was a guy called Travis Baldry, who has a book called is it Legends and Lattes, which is this wonderful cozy fantasy novel. And he did that as NaNoWriMo. And, he's now at MCM. They flew him over from the States, smash it.
NaNoWriMo's had a ton of great novels that have come off the back of it as well. So it's like, I say to everyone, try everything. Like we've always said on this podcast, we're not here to tell you how you have to write, what the 7 rules of writing are. We're here to say, these are all the different ways people write. They're all the different ways that people, form their habits. You have to find yours. And I say to everyone, try everything. Try everything at least once. It's like I say to my kids, the 3-bite rule, right? You don't know if you're going to like broccoli until you've tried it 3 times. And after that, okay, you gave it a go. So try everything. Try NaNoWriMo, try the 200-word challenge, and some things will work for some people and some things will work for other people. But unless you try them, you'll never know. And it's like people who discover that they love to sing and join a choir in their 60s. It's like, and then they think, oh, I could have been doing this all my life. And you don't want to get into the later years of your life to discover, actually, the thing that really worked for me was the 200-word challenge, right? You don't want to get, you don't want to get to 60, 70, 80, 90 to find that out. You should be doing it and trying it, trying everything and see what works for you.
I love to sing, but other people don't like me singing.
It's a very private thing, is it?
Particularly dogs. They start howling.
Oh my gosh. Let's talk about this fascinating learning storytelling through TV shows, as we call it.
Oh,
like
I
this
love
idea
this.
that Tracey kind of was brilliant. She like laid it out there. She said, I didn't read when growing up. I didn't read much.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And it all came from this idea that, you know, she was baffled by Jane Austen, which I completely understand, because, you know, you're coming into the wonderful world of literature, and there is a chance that someone might thrust something into your hands and say, this is the most important book ever written, you have to read it, otherwise, you know, you're not a proper reader, kind of thing. And that can be really off-putting, you know. It's so, you know, Jane Austen, I mean, we're going to have lots of listeners who are massive Jane Austen fans, but just as many will be listening going, I don't get it, you know. I prefer something
like Shakespeare
contemporary.
for me. When I read our first Shakespeare novel when I was I don't know what it was.
You didn't write novels for a start.
Sorry, plays. But 12 years of age, I couldn't make head or tail of King Lear. I didn't know what was going on in the language.
That's a tough one to start with.
Do you know what I
King
mean?
Lear, bloody hell.
Right? So the thing is that there's it takes time to develop the skills, doesn't it, to understand. And when you've got something like you know, a daytime soap, which is having to write for the mass market, they can't take risks. They can't do like, you know, really deep dialogue and.
No, they can't muck about. They've got to keep the readers. I mean, something like The Bold and the Beautiful, which is, you know, a very long-running American soap. Neighbours, she mentioned as well. And over here, we've got, you know, tons of soaps in the UK as well. Very often, they rely a lot on commercial income, you know, so they need to attract lots of viewers in order to get commercials, in order to fund the show. And to do that, they've got to keep people on the hook. They've got to keep people coming back for more. So they are full of those wonderful little micro tensions where you're thinking, okay, just another minute. They also, I mean, you know, we're living in a golden age of TV and streaming where at the time of recording, Netflix doesn't have commercial breaks. There is, of course, going to be a version where there are. And in the screenwriting community, I'm hearing people going, "Oh no, I'm going to have to write for commercial breaks again," because when you write for The Bold and the Beautiful, there will no doubt be a series Bible that says, "Okay, we need a cold open where you grab the viewer straight away, and then after say 10 minutes we need a cliffhanger because that's where the first commercial break is, and then another 8 minutes because in America there are commercial breaks every bloody 5 minutes it seems, compared to the UK, and then we have another commercial break. So the writers have to write in very specific slots in order to hit those deadlines, and it's a real skill to do that. So they are the masters of keeping people on the hook. Same with Oprah and Judge Judy. These are all dramas that have they purport to be real, but they are in fact working to that same kind of model where they're keeping you on the hook. You've got to keep people coming after the commercial break, because that's when they leave the room to make a drink or go to the loo, and you've got to have them want to come back afterwards.
It's kind of interesting as well to think about how commerce actually dictates how people have to write. Isn't that fascinating that we have to make amendments to ensure that they have some kind of economic model to make what they're doing viable? I think it's sad in some ways because you just want people to write. I think that's been one of the beauties of streaming media, that you could just write it. I mean, with the Netflix, I was watching Ted Lasso the other day, that really random episode where Coach, what's his name?
I watch it and I can't remember. The guy with the beard, he's just wandering around London, isn't he?
Coach Beard, that's his name. Thank you, Mark. Coach Beard, everyone started shouting, Coach Beard, for God's sake. It's the really random one where Coach Beard just goes like off on some weird trippy adventure, and it's completely out there. But I watched it and I thought that felt a lot longer than a normal episode. It was like 43 minutes compared to the usual half an hour. They won't be able to do that in the future with commercials because it doesn't fit into the mold. But
that's an Apple show. And actually,
sorry, you're right. Apple, yeah.
Apple. I don't think are thinking about a commercial model.
Not yet.
Well,
here's the thing, folks. Watch this space. Netflix are having to do this model because they find themselves in a situation where it dictates that they have to do it. It's like Twitter and all the rest of it going on right now. People are changing their models of charging for content. Netflix are either going to live or die by this decision, I believe. And regardless of what happens, if they live by it, then everyone else will switch to a similar model if they're seeing Netflix doing brilliantly well because everyone's happy with it. So it's gonna dictate, I think, the future of streaming. It's going to be a really interesting play. But my goodness me, who knows? Will Netflix be around in 5 years? I mean,
I think they will.
Well, life cycles to everything. I remember working with the guy that set up one of the DVD by post services that actually eventually was bought by Amazon Prime. Well, that DVD by post service is no longer
with us.
working. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, folks, so much more to discuss in the extended edition of this podcast. We're going to be talking about balancing story and the message. We're going to be talking about the importance of pitching and the elevator pitch and query letters. And we're going to talk about the fact that readers don't owe you anything, and dive into this discussion that Tracey mentioned about the reader statistics that she got, and how we know in our world as book writers, as novelists, how that information is there, but we can't get access to it. And then we're going to also dive into looking about the whole world of revising, first drafts, revisions, and publishing. Is absolutely fascinating. So if you are a subscriber to this podcast, a patron member or an Academy member, you will get that extended. And if you would like to get hold of that, then pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support to sign up to the podcast now. So, Mark, what's been happening on wins and social media this week?
It's been wonderful stuff. Now, you remember a couple of weeks ago, Thomas Dunn, one of our listeners, he had a heart attack and 2 cardiac arrests. I checked in with Tommy, and he says, I'm on the long road to recovery. He says, but the bonus is more writing time. So
I love his positivity.
Exactly.
Out of every travesty, right? Wow.
So, yeah, get well soon, Tommy. I really hope
Tommy.
you are on the road to recovery. It's wonderful, though. Now, I don't know if you saw this on the BXP group, but Susie Edge, who has been a guest on a deep dive previously, and one of our favourite authors, she's had an amazing year this year with her book about mortal monarchs. She says, last night, Halloween of all nights, I watched Sleepy Hollow with the kids, then sent them to bed. I sat writing for a while in the quiet as Mr. Edge was away, her husband. The hour was late, and eventually I thought I should let the dog out before heading to bed. I like to listen to a podcast when I go to bed, so I turned on Spotify and selected The Bestseller Experiment. The wheel turned, but my phone didn't connect to the internet. It often happens, so I gave up. I put the phone in my back pocket, and without turning on any lights, I went through the house to the back door to let the dog out. I live in the middle of nowhere, so it was pitch black and silent. I stood for a moment looking out at the swaying trees, breathing in the fresh air and the darkness. And then a man's voice behind me said, "What are your writing dreams?" My phone had connected to the Wi-Fi. Mr. D started talking. I haven't jumped so high in many years.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, Susie, I'm so sorry. I do like an odd prank here and there, but that's absolute genius. Halloween of all nights. Oh my God.
Rhoda Baxter replied, Jeeves, she said, the marks talking from your bottom sounds very worrying. I said, it's never stopped us talking from ours, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, definitely go see a doctor about that. Absolutely. Oh, that's absolutely priceless.
Yes, but we got a public declaration as well from Tracey Montague. Tracey has finished a 3,000-word homework final piece, 2 chapters of a new novel from and she said, I really like it. Think I'll make a great project once her current series is finished. So got back into and worked out where she is with book 2 of her trilogy. Got all geared up to writing it again. Feeling better about that. But it doesn't sound like much, but I've worked on it every evening after work. So she's making a public declaration. She's going to finish book 2's first draft by the end of March 2023. If nothing else, it'll help me get a bloody move on. Tracey, that is in the diary. I put it in the diary with a reminder. So you'll be hearing from me at the end of March 2023. And, it does work. And Tracey's first book is an absolute belter. So really looking
Good
forward
luck with
to
that,
that.
Tracey. Awesome stuff.
Fantastic stuff. And Kay Vincent on the Academy, she's put, wow, an actual proper writing win. I've just received an email telling me that I'm a successful shortlisted entrant for the Avon and My Weekly Short Story competition, which I entered in August, but didn't hear anything back from them by their September deadline. So she says, I'm a bit stunned. So congratulations, Kay, for making the shortlist, and fingers crossed that there's a win on the horizon for you.
Amazing news. Fantastic. Brilliant stuff. So listen, folks, if you've got any wins you'd like to share with us, we'd love to share it with the world and inspire other writers. So just pop along to the Bestseller Experiment website and click on the contact button, and you can fill out that form there. Mark and I read every single email. We try to respond to everyone. And whilst you're there, click on the newsletter tab and sign up to the podcast newsletter, where we'll send you an overview of every episode that we've recorded, what we've learned, what you can learn too, and all the great like links of things coming up as well. And Mark, how can people find us on socials?
Social media, Facebook is Bestseller Experiment. Twitter and Instagram is @BestsellerXP. And just to say, look, we've had some absolutely cracking deep dives recently. These are for patrons as well. So we had Susie Edge talking about TikTok. We've had one on ADHD for ADHD Awareness Month. We've had one on screenwriting. We've got one, in fact, it might be out by the time you listen to this, a deep dive on forensics, which if you're a crime or thriller writer, you are absolutely want to going to listen to. So yeah, do check these out. There's hundreds of hours of extra material, all for the taking.
Absolutely. And folks, why do we make these deep dives? Well, we make these deep dives to encourage you to subscribe to this podcast. And why do we encourage you to subscribe to this podcast? And that is because every podcast costs money to make. And we do so appreciate people that are supporting this podcast. And if you have been listening to this podcast for a while now and you're really enjoying it, please do consider supporting it. It makes all the difference and keeps this show on the road. Also, if you haven't tried it yet, we talked about it in the interview today with Tracey, but if you want to get the habit of writing for a lifetime, try the 200-word challenge. That's at 200wordchallenge.com. If you tried it before and you need a bit of a pep, if you maybe fallen off the NaNoWriMo bandwagon, a good cure for that is get your 200 words and come and start it again. It's there and it's available and it's free for everyone that does it. 200wordchallenge.com. And finally, if you're interested in joining the Academy, please do have a listen to all the incredible Academy stories that we're giving you on the podcast, telling you about the amazing journeys that everyone's going on. And you can find out more by visiting academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. So, Mr. Stay, have a fantastic week this week. Can't wait to chat more very, very soon. It's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2.
Bye. Goodbye.